Morning YouTubers. Today's video is going to be about how to time up an unknown camshaft. Now, lots of camshafts have been made for Hillmans over the years, and one of the most frequent phone calls I get is from people asking the question, what do I dial this on at? It's doing this. What should this be? And I'm like, well, all I can say is, as a rough guide, we always say put the inlet between 15 and 20 thou ahead of the exhaust. And that probably sounds like complete gobbledygook if you're a bit of a newbie to engines. But what I'll try and do is I'm going to try and not to like digress and go down loads of different roads. I'm going to talk about the engine as a one-cylinder engine with the two valves and the cam lobes. And basically, if you've got a Hillman with an unknown cam and you want to time it in by the end of this video, I'm really hoping you'll be able to do that. So this camshaft in this customer's engine, there's no literature on it. It's called a GB72, which is an old school George Bevan camshaft grind, and I assume that 1972 was the year of manufacture. So you know, maybe this was the cam that they used in the touring car championship in 1972. So really nice piece of old kit. It's actually a steel cam as well, so you know it was probably one of his race engines of the day. So I go over here now with the camera to my little book, and we look, and we've got all different camshafts and the specs, and I basically can't see anything that says anything about a George Bevan camshaft. So what we're going to do to time it up? Well, what we're going to do as a first step is we're going to find a really good TDC. So imagine you're in your garage now, where you need to know when the piston is at the top of the bore, because that is where we set the camshaft. So what we do is we get some paraffin or diesel or kerosene in a little fairy washing up liquid tub like this. I use this for CCing, but this will serve the same purpose. And what we do, the easiest way of getting a good TDC figure, in my opinion, is obviously make sure the lobes are at the top so that that cylinder is sealed, both valves are shut, pistons near the top, and then we just squirt the fluid into the, can you see it, into the cylinder chamber until we see it at the bottom of the spark plug thread. Okay, I can see it now. So what we do then is we put a spanner or a socket on the crank, and basically we move it backwards and forwards until we see the fluid at its highest point. So what I'll try and do is I'll just try and get a bit of a zoom in on the camera. That's the wrong way. Oh, right, great. So we can see that. Are you ready for the posh word that I learned off the internet? The meniscus. I've been practicing that for you guys. So that's the fluid basically that makes a funny shape because it's got surface tension. So we can see that just there is our highest point. So we know that is when the chamber is at its smallest size and the piston is at its highest point. Now, what I like to do is I like to do this when I'm timing an engine up. It's great having a bit of a paint mark and everything, but if you just get a bit of old solder or aluminium welding wire, as I've got here, wrap it around the nut, tighten it up, and get it really close to the front pulley, what you can do is make yourself your own TDC marker that you know is going to be accurate, because we're going to have to come back to it and forward from it and all sorts of different things while we're doing this operation. So it's really good that we've got a TDC marker. So what I'm going to do now is, it's always good when messing with cam timing, good practice, we'll just bring it away from top dead so that if we start moving the valves, we're not going to catch the piston. And then we're going to talk a little bit more. I've got a demonstration cam here, just to talk about the camshaft and how it works. So if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll know I like talking about overlap, which is where we hold the valves open on the exhaust stroke, at the top of the exhaust stroke, to cause the scavenger effect, so we get a good cylinder fill and a really good bang. So a race camshaft like this, if you look at the lobes, you'll see they're both higher than the base circle. So what that means is when these are obviously pointing downwards, so it's on overlap. Both valves are held open at top dead center, and that is what we call a TDC lift figure. So we haven't got any figures for this cam. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a clock gauge on it, and we're going to measure what we've got on the inlet at top dead center, or we're going to get even, sorry. So we'll measure it on the inlet. So say we'll wind it on so the buckets look level, and we'll back it off, measure the inlet, then go back to 0, and then we'll wind it off on the exhaust, and we'll measure that, and that'll give us 2 figures. And from them figures, we'll determine an evens figure. So we say if we do it to start with, we didn't quite get it right, we might get 160 thou on the inlet, 140 on the exhaust. So then we'll go back and try for 150, 150, and basically we'll balance it out. When we've got that top dead center figure, that evens lift figure, then we can decide how much advance to put on the cam, depending on what it is. If it's got, I don't know, 175 thou of lift at top dead on evens, then it's going to want like a good 20 thou advance on it. If it's only got 110 thou, then we might only want like 10 thou advance on it. But we'll determine that later. Obviously, it's not like a twin cam engine like in a Lotus Cortina where we have 2 separate camshafts. This is a fixed camshaft, so we haven't got that to worry about. It's basically the lobe separation angle is determined by the grind of the cam, whereas obviously on a twin cam engine, 8 valve or 16 valve, we can change the cam timing relative to each cam because the cam is not fixed. It's 2 separate cams. Right. I'll have a think about what the next part's going to be about, and we'll go from there. Right. Okay. All I've done since the last video there was I have sucked the paraffin back out of the chamber so it's dry again. We've got the crankshaft in a safe position with the piston slightly down from top dead center. And what you'll notice is that both valves are off lift at the moment. So we are on what we call the firing stroke. So the piston will be at the top in the engine now, and the gases will be about to burn and push the piston down. So I'm going to move the camshaft around because we know the piston is out of the way. And what I'm going to do is I'm trying to gauge what I think is a good evens figure, just to start with, so before I put a clock gauge on. So I'm just trying to gauge how far the buckets are, which is really hard on this engine because it's got this lovely Carter cam carrier that stops it from seeing. So what we'll do is, you might not be able to have this option because you've probably got a manifold on, but if you've not got a manifold on, what you can do is look down the port at the back of the valve. I'm going to try and shine my light. Can you see the inlet valve is open there? There you go, you can see it. The valve's open there, and the exhaust valve, I can get the torch just to line up at the right point, is open more. You can see that's open more. So we need to back it off a little bit. So we'll back it off a smidge. Just bring the camera out. So I've set the valves evens at top dead, or as close as I can by eye. And I just realised when I was trying to hold the torch in the phone, there's an easier way of doing this. Basically, if I shine the torch down the down the plug hole there, then the light bounces off things in the chamber, and we can see, it was zoom in correctly, we can see that the valve is open on the inlet and on the exhaust, and they look pretty even to me. So we'll put the clock gauge on now. If you haven't got a clock gauge, you can buy all this stuff, you know, off eBay. It's not there. This is quite a nice one because it's on a nice block that bolts, but you can just have a piece of plate that bolts to the cam cover face, and then a magnetic base, you know, with a clock on it. All this stuff really, really well available. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on the top of the bucket. Just put a little bit of pressure on, so we just see the needle start to move. And then we're going to wind it off and measure the lift. So what we do is we have to 0 it. So what I'll do is I'll spin the engine a little bit so that we can get a good visual on this with the camera for you guys. Right. Wedge the engine a bit so it doesn't rock around and spoil the camera view. Should have prepped this better, shouldn't I? Never mind. Right, let's see, engine quite steady. Right, so if I get this now and set you up like that, hopefully you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. Right, so I think the cam is in a fairly even position. So what I do is I set the clock to 0, and then because the cam lobe is on lift, we have to go in an anti-clockwise direction to bring it off lift. Okay, so first thing to do, we know the crank's in a safe position, pistons aren't near the top, so I'll start backing it off. So 1 revolution is 50 thou. Okay, 2 revolutions is 100 thou. That's 150 thou. And then we've got 150, 5, 10, 15, and 2. So that's 117. Sorry, that's 17 added on to our 150. So it's 167. So what we do is we just add to our sheet some information here. So we're starting with 167 thou on the inlet. And then what we do is go back to here and basically, very simply, we have to get back to our start point before we can measure the exhaust. So I'm going to put a lift back on the valve now. So we've wound it off so it's got no lift now. I'm winding it back on the valve. So that was our 17, that was our 50, that was our 100. And when we get to 0 now, that should be our 167, did I say? Yeah, right. So we're at 0 again now. So the cam is back in what I thought was an evens position. And then what we do is, dead simply, move the clock gauge over to the exhaust cam follower and bring it down. Always try and hold the clock gauge as vertical as you can. Sort of, what's the word for it? Because obviously, as the follower comes up, if the clock gauge is at an angle, you don't get true representation, true measurement. So it's very important that we try and keep the clock gauge as straight to the cam follower as possible to get an accurate figure. Right, let's get this around here. Bring this down a little bit. Okay, so we're on the exhaust now. Now the exhaust lobe, to wind the lift off, we go the opposite way. So we're going to go in a clockwise direction because the lobe is over here and we want it to come off lift. Okay, so as that, can we see that? Okay, move the block a little bit, try and get it as clear as possible for you guys. There you go, it's got it a bit better. Okay, so I'm going to wind the lift off now, so I'm going to come in a clockwise direction. Okay, so we've got 50, 100, 100, and 117. Right, so I didn't get that right, did I? 117. And the reason I didn't get it right, although it looked good, was probably find that the valve heights aren't uniform. So when looking through the chamber, you get a bit of an iffy image. So we look at these figures now. 167, so it's basically, we call it 170, 120. Now, that would be too much. I think this is going to be evens at about 140. So what we'll do is we'll 0 this because we're off lift, and we'll put 140 thou on it, and then we'll see what that gives us on the inlet. So I've got to go anti-clockwise now to put the lift back onto the lobe, onto the follower. So 50, 100, 125, 130. That is 140. It's just the camera angle looks bad. Right, so that's 140 on the exhaust. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little marker referencing where I think the evens figure is going to be. So a bit of a mark on there with blue paint. Right, and then what I'll do is bring this over to the inlet side and bring it down, and we'll wind it off and see what we've got on that. So I'll bring the camera around there. Okay, so we're back on the inlet cam now. And I want to basically wind off from there. So I'm going to 0 it and go in an anti-clockwise because it's on lift this way. So it's the opposite from the exhaust. So 50, 100, 150, 100 and let's call that 8. So 158. So 158, 140. So we'll write these figures down here. So we had 158 on the inlet and 140 on the exhaust. Now that is actually giving us 18th hour head on the inlet than the exhaust, which, to be fair, is probably where I'd like to start the cam off. What you've got to remember when you're dealing with a cam like this is having it 5 hour ahead or 5 hour behind doesn't necessarily kill the horsepower. It just moves it. It's robs and gains. So with a camshaft, the more you advance the camshaft, so the more lift we have on the inlet, the lower down the torque curve the power is produced. And if we retard the cam, so the figures are more evens at top dead, then the further up the power band we produce the power and we lose mid-range torque. So it's all robs and gains. So I'm actually quite happy with that at that stage. I think 158, 140 is a good starting point, and we'll put it on the dyno. And if it's happy and doing the predicted sort of torque and horsepower I want it to, we'll leave it alone. And if it isn't, then we'll revisit it. But I'll turn this off now and we'll go to the next stage. Right, before we go through the next stage, which will be timing up the camshaft with the chain relative to the crankshaft position, there's something we should always do when we do an engine build. Really, this should have been done at an earlier stage than I'm doing now. But if you've got to this stage, it's still good practice to do it. Now I know, because I did it when it was the head was loose with no valve springs on, etc. I know what the total lift is before the valve contacts the piston at top dead center. And this is a very important figure. I use a figure of 250 thou. And what that is I use my little mitzies to describe it. We've got our inlet and exhaust valves. So the piston comes up and basically, I've done that wrong, haven't I? So the exhaust valve has been open as the piston has come up, and then the inlet valve started to open, so we get the scavenge. So there becomes a point where the valves, as the piston goes down the bore, the inlet cam, he chases the piston down the bore. And when we're using modern profiles especially, the acceleration of the valve can be so fast that even though we've got clearance at top dead center, just after top dead center, the piston's dwelled, you see, because of the angle of the rod. The valve catches up and hits him. So we're running on this engine 158 thou of lift at top dead center, but the piston won't have moved much at, say, 10-15 degrees crankshaft rotation, and the valve will have accelerated and will be chasing him down the bore. That's why we need a minimum really of on this cam 220, 250 clearance at top dead. There's a really easy way of checking it, and I'll show you. So basically, we've got the piston, the crankshaft here. I'll just bring this round to our marker because we've had it in a safe position all this time, haven't we? So I'll bring him round. Oh, I just have to move the camera out of the way. Right, we just have to start again with this because I noticed that the camera had dropped down and you couldn't see the clock gauge, and I wanted you to be able to see that, so it gave you a better idea of what was going on. So we've got the piston well down the bore, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to put a bit of lift on to basically to get the exhaust cam out of the way so that we can come back to top dead center, because really we should do this with no cam in it and with no valve springs on it and the head just bolted on, so we can measure the little clearance. Anyway, that's where we're at. So I brought the cam right off lift, so the inlet lobe is pointing here now. So we zero it, and I'm going to put it in the midway position. So say we'll go 150. So 150, 100, 150. So it's got 150 thou lift on it roughly, and then we can go out to TDC now, and that's fine because the piston is out of the way. Sorry, the exhaust valve is out of the way because we're working on the inlet. So we'll carry on now. So that's 150, and that's 200, 242, 241, should we say? So we've got totally at top dead center, we've got the inlet valve can come down 241 thou before it hits the piston. So if we're running was it 167 thou at top dead, we've basically got about 100 thou, 80 thou before the piston can catch up to the valve can catch up to the piston. So that's ample. That on this profile of cam, absolutely no problem whatsoever. So what we've got to do now is we'll bring this back, and I'll go to my blue marker that I made on the cam, because I know that means I've got 140 thou lift on the exhaust. So what we'll do is we'll zero it on the exhaust now, and try and get a decent camera angle for you guys. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to wind the lift on the exhaust cam until that one contacts. So we know we've got 140 because that's our blue mark, which was what we wound on before, if you remember. So we've got 140, that's another 50, so that's 190. And we've just come shy. So it's 190 plus 200, 210, 220, 230, 235. So we've got 235 on the exhaust as well. So absolutely fine. That's plenty of space for it to get out of the way, because obviously at top dead center the exhaust was running less lift, wasn't it? So yeah, 140. So we've got ample clearance there. So I'm happy with that. So what we'll do now is we'll get the chain ready to go on and time up the camshaft relevant to the crankshaft. Right, now there's the exciting bit, the good bit. We're going to time the cam up. So first thing we do, move the crankshaft away from top dead center so it's in a safe position, so when messing about we can't get any valve contact. Second thing we're going to do is we are going to wind the lift off the cam so we can put our 167 thou on it. So I've wound it off there. Just give that a bit more. So we're definitely no lift on number one inlet, and then we'll put the clock gauge on the first cam follower, wind it on a fair bit like that, so that when we put it on it's got plenty to come out. We'll zero it, and then we will put the lift on the cam. So we've got 50, 100, 150, 160, 165, oh, one too far, one too far again, 167. Can you see that? Has the camera got that? Yeah, great. Right. So our cam is in our TDC position now. We'll just put a paint marker on here so I can just roughly reference it in case they get confused, which is quite possible. Right. Now, what we need to do next is I just need to take this front pulley bolt out. So what I'm going to do, which you're all going to cringe at now, is I'm gonna put some mole grips on the camshaft because they didn't put a hex on them as factory. It won't mark it because it's rock hard. So we'll just jar the camshaft up like this, and hopefully it won't move. Okay, and then crack that off. Are we still on 167? No, it's moved. That's great, just what we needed. So I need to put that lift back on again so that we're back where we should be. So that was our 150, 160, 167. Okay, now because the nut's not tight, hopefully if I just grab the cam a little bit and gently ease it, we've managed to undo the nut now, the bolt, sorry, without the camshaft moving. So our cam is in the position we want it to be at. Now, the way I go about doing this job is I remove the dowel with the mole grips. Hopefully it's going to come out. Give it a little wiggle. And then what I do is, if you can see, bring the crankshaft back round to top dead center. So we've got a little pointer there, and we have this is called a multi-hole sprocket. Very clever. All these holes are in different relations to the gears, so they're about 5 degrees apart. So in theory, we should be able to get a hole that matches up with the dowel, and then we can get the cam timing correct. So, very important, one side's got a big chamfer radius. Obviously that goes face down so that the cam wheel can sit flat against the thrust face of the camshaft. So there we are, that's the cam sprocket on. Let's give him a little sensor. Also, definitely something worth noting is if we look inside here, this little slider, it can go 2 ways, so it can flick over this way and get caught in the chain. So always make sure it's sat against this little slider that it runs in. Okay, now what I'll try and do is I'll try and change the angle of this so that we can see into the end of the actual thing, into the end of the camshaft, and see the line up on it. Oops, that was clever, wasn't it? Broke the phone midway through. Right, is that showing what I want it to show? Nearly. So if you look through the holes, you can see this bottom one here. Let's just get this a little bit further over. Right, can you see in this wonderful setup off eBay that I bought for about £3.50 straight from Ho Chi Chong, the dowel isn't quite lined up. That's our TDC figure there. Right, okay, so what we need to do is basically we slide this off the end of the cam. Just come out a little bit on my zoom so we can get my fat finger in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, we know the crank's in the right place, so I'm just going to move it one chain tooth at a time until I see the hole line up perfectly. And believe it or not, I can't believe it. That never works like that. The second hole I've come to does actually appear to be absolutely crack on. Can you see it? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer up the pin and see if he wants to go in. Let's give him a gentle tap because they are tight. Yep, that sounds quite good. Now, if I zoom out, you'll see that through all this operation, we need the chain to be tight on this side because that's the side I'm measuring from. So now, obviously, when I put this together properly, I'll be Loctite in all of it, etc. And you have to use a tab location washer for one important reason, which I negated to realise once, and that is this washer, although it does absolutely nothing for holding the bolt tight, that little flimsy bit of steel, it holds the dowel in, so should the dowel choose to wander, it can't wander out. So what we'll do is we'll nip it up and then we'll do a lap and then we'll measure it and we'll see if it's roughly where we want it to be. Okay, nips that, not Loctited or anything, and I'll bring the camera back a little bit so we've got a bit of an overall picture. You can see the clock. We'll go into this mode. Seems to give us a better view of what's going on. It's trying to fall over, which is very frustrating. Right, so we've got the clock gauge, etc. there. So I'm going to move the clock out of the way so that the cam lobe doesn't hit it. And then what we'll do is we'll do a lap of the engine and just let everything settle down. So listening and feeling all the time for anything that might be potentially catching. Everything feels good, which is lucky. So we're approaching our TD seat figure. Excuse me. Right. Okay, we're back to TDC there. I'm going to pause this a second. Right, okay, I finished dying now. So we've got the camshaft in top dead center position. So we're TDC here. In theory, we've got a 167th valve lift on number one inlet cam valve. So what we'll do is bring this down and drop him in. Just touch on the bucket because as we wind off, it's going to put the lift onto the follower, and then set him to 0. I'm not sure whether we can see that or not. Can we quite make that out, or is it? It's not very good, is it, that angle? We'll try and get a better angle. Okay, you can just see him there now. So I'll just zoom in a little touch. Oh, that was a bit drastic, wasn't it? Okay. Come back one. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind the lift off. So we're going to go anti-clockwise now with the crankshaft to measure the lift that we have. So we've got tight side of the chain now. So we're looking at the clock gauge. We should have between 165 and 170, I reckon, if I'm any good. So there's 50. There's 100. There's 150. 155. 160. 165. Oh my God. It's about 168. 2, 3, yeah. 168. We're a thou out on our target. Oh, well, we'll live with that. So, okay, we're all timed up. Sorry, we had a little glitch with the camera. Something technical went wrong, which was beyond me, but I turned the phone on and off and it seems to be working again now. So, what I was going to say was, I'm going to take this bolt out now, put some Loctite on it, recheck my timing. I'm happy that's all correct. I don't need to measure on the exhaust because the cam is fixed, so whatever the inlet is, the exhaust will be correct, obviously. Now, what I wanted to talk about was, for 1 second, is these little tabs, and this will upset some people because the purists love these little tabs, but that is not going to stop the nut from coming undone. And I often find these, when secondhand, they fell off and in the sump and stuff. So what I do is I get a new one and I cut the tabs off it so they can't fall off and contaminate the engine. But I do still fit this because, like I said before, the important thing about it is it stops the pin from wandering out. And you think, well, the pin's driving the cam, right? So how's that wander out? Well, it isn't actually. The pin is just purely for location. The cam is driven by friction. This big washer clamping the sprocket between the end of the camshaft is what drives it. So if you ever took a modern Ford apart or anything like that, you'll notice they're all on like what we call taper drives. So they don't have a keyway. It's all keyless. You set the cams up and you tighten it up and the friction drives the cam. It's much the same as this, although this was designed with a pin in it, obviously. But I've had it where the pins fell out and the cam and the engines ran fine for years. Anyway, I'm digressing. So what I was going to say, a little imp tip. Well, an imp tip is something that I do. Whether you like it or not is up to you. If you look at this washer, you can just about see it's got a bow in it. And the reason for that is the shoulder where it clamps it is so small, the area on the inside of here. Look at this little clamping area. That basically it mushrooms the washer. So what I like to do is I throw the imp sprocket bolt away, and this is a bolt that I buy for a Lotus Cortina engine. It's just a 3/8 UNF flywheel bolt, but they're a bit longer and obviously a better material. So put the cylinder head bolt washer, because that's 3/8 as well. Obviously it's a 3/8 UNC bolt, isn't it, for the cylinder head studs. So we've all got a spare washer kicking around. They're lovely washers, they're good thick washers. So we do that, then we put that on, then we put this on, and we still end up with slightly more depth of thread than original. So even though it's a longer bolt, with the extra washer, we still end up the same. And basically, I torque this to 40 foot-pound with Loctite retainer 248, and that's a high-strength retainer, the green stuff. And you will never have a problem with your sprocket coming undone or any issues in that area. So that's what I do. Up to you what you do, but that's how I like to do them. So I hope you've enjoyed the video and you've learned something, and you can feel confident in timing up that unknown camshaft that you've had sat in the top drawer of your garage wondering how it'll work in your imp. Okay, see you for now.